Wow. Hi, everyone. This is, this right here is really overwhelming just to see everyone right here. And I guess I have another announcement that is a little bit overwhelming. So we created this voluntary minor fund pool because, we are a community-driven, decentralized project. And it's always been, 100% purely mined coins. So when I created ZClassic, I didn't get any for free for making it. I made some source code, and I went on Bitcoin Talk, and I said, hey, you guys can mine this if you want, right? And so a lot of other projects have community funds set aside to pay all these centralized service providers like exchanges and wallets for partnerships and things. And so we all want Bitcoin Private and ZClassic to succeed in the future. We want them to be the best possible projects that they can be. So we created this voluntary miner pool fund where miners can actually contribute to basically ZClassic that will get donated to be used by a group of individuals to help create partnerships with centralized services and products. And yesterday, it was mining at about 1% of the total hash rate of ZClassic. And I just checked in about the past hour, it's jumped to about 18% of the total mining hash rate of ZClassic. So, I guess we could get a round of applause for the miners, wherever they are. But that's just one of those things that, I didn't know if that would come together. I had no idea. It was an experiment, and it looked like it was at 1%, and yesterday it was kind of like, well, it is what it is. And jumping to 18%, and it's probably going to keep increasing, it shows how much community support there is for this long term. And so I'm going to talk about the history of ZClassic and what you're really going to see. When we start getting into the Bitcoin private history, you're going to just see how incredibly fast this all kind of came together. Okay, so first I want to start with Ralph Merkle. So I guess I'd really like to see, raise your hand if you don't know who Ralph Merkle is. There's a lot of people. Raise them high. I want to see everyone who doesn't know who Ralph, okay, you all need, so if there's one thing, exactly, if there's one thing that we walk away from at this talk, you all will now know who Ralph Merkle is. Okay, so who is Ralph Merkle? Well, in 1979, he patented this data structure. It's called a Merkle tree. And it is the data structure that is used in Bitcoin for the blockchain. So you have this thing, if you look at a block explorer, there's a Merkle root, okay, and I highlighted it in pink. And that hash is when people talk about the Bitcoin blockchain is immutable and you can't go back and change the history, and there was a big talking point for a long time. That is all because it's all secured by that Merkle root, which is part of the Merkle graph data structure that Ralph Merkle invented, right? But Bitcoin was not actually the first application to use this data structure. So when people talk about blockchains, in my mind, I think, well, that's really, you're describing this data structure, this Merkle root data structure, right? But we had this data structure with Git in 2005. So Linus Torvalds understood that he needed a data structure to secure the code of the Linux kernel, because that was actually securing billions and billions of dollars worth of computers all around the world, right? So he also used a Merkle tree data structure, and that commit also guarantees the immutability of the entire commit history of all of the Linux kernel history before it. So it's very important, right? But while Ralph was actually working on and inventing this Merkle tree data structure, he was not very well known for his work. In fact, Ralph Merkle was best known for being the nephew of Fred Merkle. Okay, so this is Ralph Merkle's uncle, Fred Merkle. Has anyone here ever heard of Fred Merkle? So it was kind of a long time ago. Okay, so you haven't heard of Fred Merkle. Well, Fred Merkle is really famous for not stepping on second base, is what he was famous for. And so it was actually it was a 1908 pennant race. So I'm going to go into a baseball analogy here. I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. It's going to be, if anyone, I don't know if you like or dislike baseball analogies, but I'm going to get into this baseball analogy, and it kind of ties together. So Fred Merkle was in the 1908. He played for the Giants. It was a pennant race, and it was actually his rookie season, and it was his first game of the whole season. He was substituted in. He was on first base. There was a runner on first and third, and it was a tie game, bottom of the ninth, and so, his teammate gets a hit, right? And the runner on third base comes home, and Fred Merkle, remember, he's on first base, so he's running up to second. The runner comes home, tags home plate. The fans go nuts. Everyone runs onto the field, right? And everyone's celebrating. They won the game. And then Fred runs into the fans, and he's celebrating, right? And then the players in the Cubs, they realize that he never touched second base, right? So what they did is this was him. There's the hit, and he's running towards second base, right? And then all the fans run onto the field, and so the players in the Cubs, they have to go and they have to fight some fans to get the ball, right? And they bring the ball back minutes later. They step on second base. They bring an umpire over, and all the fans are on the field. And the umpire looks and he's like, yeah, he's out. And if Fred is out, it's a forced play. They take the run back, and they lose the game, right? And so there were, newspapers, they call it a boner, right? Merkle posed boner. And this was what he was known for, okay? His whole life, and in fact, he never lived it down. His 40 years later. No, it wasn't just 40 years later till the day he died. His whole career, all anyone knew was that he was the guy that didn't step on second base. And it went so far, that was all people knew about Ralph Merkle, was that he was the nephew of the guy that didn't step on second base one time. Okay? And, right, this is what he was famous for. And he's finally, now he's basically invented the blockchain. And so, hopefully I think he's famous for a few more things. We all owe him a debt for being a little bit more than the nephew of the guy who didn't step on second base. But I think about this is kind of interesting how this ties together. What does this mean, right? Well, don't be like Fred, okay? And what I mean by that is you have to make sure, what are we doing here? We're all controlling our own private keys. Okay, and I have messed this up in the past, but you have to make sure your private keys, because you are controlling your own money, and they have to be secure, and they have to be available, okay? If you lose a private key, it's super secure, right? No one's gonna get it but it's not available. So you have to make sure there are both things. And if you don't do these things, if you don't go the whole way and step on second base, right, and make sure that your private keys are secure and available for your own money that you're controlling, it will haunt you for the rest of your life, and it will haunt your descendants as well, okay, just like Fred and Ralph Merkle. So, all right, that's the baseball analogy. We can take a seventh inning stretch here or something. So I want to get into, I have this theory of crypto economics, and because when people say blockchain, I just think of the data structure, right? And I think that what we're all doing is a little bit more than just the blockchain, the Merkle tree data structure. And there are really these three pieces of technology, I think, that we're tying together in crypto economics. And we've all probably heard of them in some way. One of them is just the public and private key pairs, right? So we have Diffie-Hellman public-private keys. That's been around since the 70s. Peer-to-peer networking, right? We had BitTorrent and other types of peer-to-peer networking long before Bitcoin. And then we have these Merkle data structures. And this includes, so DAGs you may have heard of. It's basically the generalized form of a Merkle data structure. It's called a directed acyclic graph. And then you can call them, say, Merkle chains or Merkle trees. The real innovation I don't know. I would say that one of the most innovative parts of Bitcoin originally was actually what we call it today as Nakamoto consensus. And that was really just this, of these three pieces, right? He didn't really innovate on the public and private keys. He didn't really innovate on this blockchain or the Merkle data structure, right? That was already invented. It kind of fell more under, on bullet point 2, the peer-to-peer networking. There was this new Nakamoto consensus algorithm with proof-of-work mining that was kind of introduced. And so, yeah, these are kind of, I guess, the three, when I think about a coin right now, I think about these three pieces of technology and then how do things fit together here. And with Bitcoin Private, what we're actually able to do, if you look at these three pieces, is we can take this data structure that already exists in Bitcoin. We have this distributed ledger, right, that everyone has access to. It's been replicated thousands of times all around the world, the Bitcoin blockchain. And we can actually, anyone can download that ledger and read it permissionlessly. And then we can actually include that into our own peer-to-peer network and technology in ZClassic. So we can take this data set and then include that into the network with all of our technology, right? And then we're bringing all of the people who are participants in that data set and that ledger into our network. And so that's really, in sort of the simplest terms, what Bitcoin Private is doing. So yeah, I want to kind of just sort of talk about the history. I mean, this was something I didn't really expect. I changed his name. This was just one example. Somebody introduced himself to me. He told me he was from Iran. I'd never met him, and this was almost about a year ago. And he said, "Oh, myself and all of my friends, we all mine ZClassic." And I had just launched ZClassic, but I mean, I wasn't really involved with it. I didn't mine it, and I was kind of shocked to hear someone say they knew of me and they mine ZClassic on a daily basis in Iran. And then I said, I said why why do you mine ZClassic? And he told me that he's already lived through an event where everything he'd ever owned in his whole life all of his wealth and his friends has been confiscated. And so the idea that when he tells people that you can mine ZClassic and you can hold that on a private key that you hold yourself that no one can take away, it's world changing to these people. And it's really it's really hard to understand that coming from, we're also privileged in the United States, and I don't feel like I live under that threat, and I've never lived through some kind of, and my father and grandfather haven't lived through some kind of event where all of their wealth has been confiscated, and we're really lucky. But there are people all around the world that are mining ZClassic and other crypto coins because this is a really powerful idea to them. And right, so this is what he says. He tells people you can hold your own private keys, and it changes everything. And then so I asked him, well, why do you guys mine ZClassic? Why don't you mine Bitcoin or something instead, right? And he said, well, we can't import the Chinese mining hardware. It's just impossible to get it. So they can only get access to the generic GPU cards to mine. And so we all know that privacy is a big reason why we're all here, but there are all these other benefits to the ZClassic and Bitcoin private community, and one of them just happens to be that the mining algorithm is really friendly to generic GPU cards, right? So what that means is it gives access to people all over the world, people who can't maybe import specialized mining hardware from China or other places. And then I said, well, why don't you guys mine Zcash, right? Zcash is bigger and stuff. Why do you mine Zclassic Zcash? And he said, they don't want to pay this 20% tax They're just, you know, they recognize that's not something that they want to be a part of, and they don't want to support just a small number of individuals that are getting 20% of this. Well, okay, so you're asking what I mean. So there's a question here for those of you who aren't familiar exactly what ZClassic is and why I was motivated to make it. So I guess it was November 2016. I actually went to an event in San Francisco with Zuko, the founder of Zcash, and they had just set up their private their ceremony for their trusted setup for Zcash, and they explained what Zcash was, and basically, you know, it was the Bitcoin with much better privacy technology, and there were a small number of individuals that invested in that project. It was actually a corporation. It's a U.S. Delaware C Corp, the Zero Coin Corporation, and right. So they invested in that, and then 20% of all the Zcash mining fund, right, goes to that organization, and then about 5% just goes to these people that just happen to invest in it early on, and it made me sick to think that, like, what if this replaces significantly a major currency in the world, and there's a small group of people that basically get 20% of all the money in the world. And so I was just like, there's got to be something we can do about this. And I went into the code and I looked at it, and it was actually really simple to edit the code to change that. So first I went on Twitter and I said, hey, why don't we all, everybody, let's just get rid of that tax, and we'll just mine it without that. And nobody really cared, right? and so, you have to kind of do it, right? So this was a commit that removed the 20% founders reward from Zcash. I don't remember exactly. It says there's 2 additions. I don't know what they were, but 215 deletions, right? So I deleted 200 lines. Most of those were tests. About 22 lines, I think, were the actual code to remove the founders reward. And so I made this code, and then I had something. I said, okay, instead of just telling people, hey, we should do this thing that's sort of not very tangible, it's like, here's the code. Now, if you're a miner, you can mine this if you want to, right? And and this was kind of how I felt. I wrote up a little article, but this was sort of just going back to, what I sort of pictured, like the Zcash Foundation trying to do, right? This was sort of from Mr. Robot, and they're saying, with eCoin, we are going to control the ledger, right? In that show, they're fighting between eCoin and Bitcoin, and this was what Zcash kind of looked a lot like to me. And and here's, just to sort of bring the point home, this is Zuko. He's not messaging me. This was somebody else he messaged, and it's a little hard to read, but Zuko says here, basically, they were enforced. They have a trademark on Zcash, right? Because they're a Delaware C Corp corporation. So he's telling someone, to be clear, we will need to initiate legal action in order to protect the trademark. If we don't do that, the trademark can be invalidated. So in practice, this may mean getting your Twitter account suspended, right? So Zuko is threatening other people, like, we might have to threaten your Twitter account if you're using Zcash in the name, right? Because that's our trademark. And so I was like, oh crap, well, I can't call it Zcash Classic because I could get sued, right, by the Zcash, the Zero Coin Foundation. So, but Zuko actually blessed ZClassic as a name, right, because it doesn't actually infringe on Zcash in any way. So that is where the name ZClassic comes from. I said, okay, well, we're taking out the founder's reward. It's Z something. You don't own the letter Z, right? And he's like, yeah, we don't own the letter Z yet, or whatever. So, so we kind of got like the okay from this, right? And then there were people in the Zcash forum, and they were saying, look, well, how could Zcash stick around? There's this other alternative that doesn't take the 20%. It's exactly the same, but it doesn't take out this 20% fee. So how is this going to stay around? So they were already kind of posting that. And, it's interesting. It is actually interesting if you look at the I guess, by some gauge, just the market capitalization of the two coins. I don't, I'm obviously not advising anyone to speculate or anything, but just looking at the past, Zcash has been a larger coin than ZClassic. So, to me, this is all kind of a big experiment. I thought maybe by taking away the 20%, it would always give this big advantage to ZClassic, but actually, we have it has appeared, at least for the past year, it was the opposite, where by having that founders reward, they were able to do something with it and create enough partnerships and interests that the Zcash has been outperforming ZClassic over the past year. Now, what I feel like we may be seeing now is it's possible that that there's some kind of, because we've been a fairly mined community coin from the beginning, this might be the point where we wind up leapfrogging them. I mean, I don't know, right? Okay, don't take that as any kind of like speculative, obviously, like, I have no idea what is going to happen with price or anything, right? But, price, I'll just say, like, we all know that Bitcoin was $19,000 a few weeks ago, and now it's whatever, 11 or something. So you can lose half your money very quickly investing in any crypto. So we all know about that. But so then Zuko, he sort of had to address this founders reward thing. And he actually came out and he defended the founders reward, but he also said that he was happy about ZClassic. And so we kind of looked at it as sort of the Red Hat Fedora model, where they're going to keep operating with this, taking the fees. But in a lot of ways, ZClassic created some redundancy for their project. So if anything ever went wrong with their project, there was actually already ZClassic sort of running. So we've sort of been friends, and actually the Zcash developers were some of the biggest contributors to. I mean, if you just look by the commits that we pull in code, obviously the Zcash developers are the biggest contributors to ZClassic. So so this is what you get when this was right after I created the code and launched it and announced it to Bitcoin Talk. This is one of maybe the fifth comment in there from Sammy's great. If you guys know Sammy 007, I don't know, but Sammy says, "Don't touch POW limit, you fucking moron." And here's a link to the commit. Those fags changed it last second. You're gonna do the same or something. So basically, there's Cunningham's law, which is the best way to get the right answer on the internet is not to ask the question, but it's to post the wrong answer. And that's a lot of what I found to be the case with this project, right? So a lot of things that I've tried to do is I will try to do some things to the best of my own abilities, and oftentimes there are problems and things wrong with it. And what's amazing is then people come forward and they say, "No, that's not right. Do it this way, do it this way." And now all that I try to do is take all those suggestions and say thank you, and can you help do it the right way? And it's really kind of what I do all day now. So now we'll get sort of to the Bitcoin private history. This is actually December 13th, so a little over a month ago. I said, look, there are these things. There are Bitcoin hard forks. Jimmy Song says 2018 is going to be the year of the Bitcoin hard fork. There's Super Bitcoin, Bitcoin Platinum, Bitcoin Uranium, Bitcoin Cash Plus, and Bitcoin Silver. And I proposed the idea right out in the open on Twitter. And I said, look, ZClassic, we have this community. We have this really great privacy technology. It's the year of the Bitcoin fork. Why don't we turn ZClassic into a Bitcoin fork? And then the next day, I said, what are we going to call it? Right? And I ran a Twitter poll. And there was like Bitcoin Shadow, Bitcoin Private, Blitzcoin, and ZBitcoin were the top choices, right? And it actually was not even an overwhelming majority. The Bitcoin Private won with about 35% of the 500 votes. And that was, yeah, I mean, that was a big part of the reason where we came up with the name. And, you know, and then we had to think about how we were going to do this, because we thought this could be a forced takeover of ZClassic. And because it was something people were really a lot more interested in Bitcoin private than they were in ZClassic a few months ago. And so we thought, why don't we just keep the community together? And I had to, you know, think pretty hard about this for about a day. And what I really concluded was that, you know, this whole thing that we're doing with crypto economics, I feel like a big part of it is about giving everyone control and choices over their own finances. And so, so I think as a developer, all that you can really do is you can offer choices to people, okay? But, you know, and then the miners, they're gonna choose whatever they wanna mine, and exchanges get to choose whatever the wallets they wanna use, and the users choose what networks they wanna connect to, right? But we had a choice where we could try to sort of coerce people, the miners and the exchanges, to say, look, this is what ZClassic is gonna be. It's actually gonna be Bitcoin private. Or as a developer, we could offer replay protection and say, you know, you can keep using ZClassic forever if you want to, but you always have this option to move over to Bitcoin private. And I wound up deciding, I think that was the responsible choice, is to offer replay protection and not try to coerce anyone into, you know, if there's say 70% that wants to switch, not trying to coerce the minority, just giving everyone the freedom to choose which network and which chain they want to use. So that's been our approach. And yeah, and then this was about 2 weeks later, you know, everything just blew up, bigger than I really could have imagined at the time. And I'd already planned a road trip, and then there was like Jake, and there was all these people chatting, and they were like, no, we need to have like a voice meeting. We all have to get together. This thing's getting really huge. And I was on the road, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop and do a Red Lobster. and I kind of just set up shop in the Red Lobster, and they were really cool about it. And you know, and this is today, a few weeks later, and we have 70 contributors, 20 engineers, and it's just grown larger than I can imagine. And that we have this, everyone's here now. So, so that's my talk, and you know, definitely, I know there are definitely going to be some questions and probably some more technical questions. So we'll sort of get to those in the Q&A.
All right, so who's ready for an announcement? Come on, that was weak. All right. We have to test out the sound first, so I'm sorry about that. We're going to announce some announcements, so hold on.